Macronaria is nested within Neosauropoda and is sister to Diplodoctoidea. These groups split around the mid to late Jurassic. Despite the fact that macronarians are named after cranial openings, they are described by more appendicular synapomorphies. The species that survived late into the Cretaceous were characterized by stocky, wide-gauged posture, most notably the highly derived Saltasaurines. Like other sauropods, Aragosaurus had a long neck, a long powerful tail, a small head and a bulky body. It probably had a short, compact skull and a moderately long neck. The teeth were large and wide, and would have been useful for slicing through the leaves and branches of tall conifer trees. The forelimbs were only a little shorter than the hind limbs, and the tail was long and muscular. Wintonodonton was a relatively small titanosaur from the Winton Formation in central western Queensland, reaching up to 15 meters in length and weighing around 10 to 15 tons. Known for its long front legs and slender build, it had distinct vertebral features that set it apart from other basal titanosauriforms. It lived during the mid-Cretaceous period in a subtropical to temperate environment with abundant rainfall and diverse plant life, including angiosperms, Araucarian conifers and ferns. This dinosaur is part of a diverse fossil assemblage from the Winton Formation, which also includes Australovenator and Diamantinosaurus. Dwarf sauropods like Fuquidodon are significantly smaller than their giant relatives, often measuring only a fraction of the size of typical sauropods. It measures about 10 meters in length. Many dwarf sauropods are thought to have evolved their smaller size due to living on islands. This phenomenon, known as insular dwarfism, occurs when resources are limited, and smaller body sizes are more advantageous for survival. Smaller body sizes would require less food and water, making these dinosaurs more efficient in their resource use. This adaptation would have been crucial in environments where food resources were scarce or fluctuated seasonally. Their smaller size might have allowed them to exploit different types of vegetation and habitats that larger sauropods could not access. Camarasaurus had a relatively short, boxy skull with large fenestrae and spoon-shaped teeth that were well suited for eating a variety of vegetation. The name chambered lizard, referring to the hollow chambers in its vertebrae. These air-filled cavities, known as pleurocoels, lightened the weight of the bones, making it easier for the dinosaur to support its massive body. Compared to other sauropods, Camarasaurus had a more robust and stocky build. It possessed strong, columnar legs and a shorter neck relative to other long-necked dinosaurs like Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus. Evidence suggests that Camarasaurus may have lived in herds. Fossilized trackways indicate group movement, which could imply social behavior, potentially offering protection against predators and enhancing reproductive success. Like other sauropods, Camarasaurus had a sophisticated respiratory system that included air sacs extending into the vertebrae. This system, similar to that of modern birds, would have been highly efficient for respiration and thermoregulation, helping maintain the enormous animal's metabolic needs. Europasaurus was an early brachiosaurid that lived during the late Jurassic, about 154 million years ago, on a small island in the Lower Saxony region of northwestern Germany. It was an example of insular dwarfism in a sauropod, only growing to around 6 meters in length, less than half the size of some of its other relatives. A layer of rock just above the deposit of Europasaurus fossils also gives us a clue about their eventual fate. Footprints of large carnivorous theropods, bigger than the mini-sauropods themselves, suggest that at some point the sea level dropped and predators from the mainland were able to reach the island. Since there were no large predators on the island before then, the small Europasaurus had no defenses against these new giant invaders. They very likely were literally eaten into extinction. Giraffatitan was originally described by German paleontologist Werner Janensch as a species of the North American sauropod Brachiosaurus from the Morrison Formation, as Brachiosaurus branchi. Recent research shows that the differences between the type species of Brachiosaurus and the Tendiguru material are so large that the African material should be placed in a separate genus. It was for many decades known as the largest dinosaur, but recent discoveries of several larger dinosaurs prove otherwise. Giant titanosaurians appear to have surpassed Giraffatitan in terms of sheer mass. Its nostrils were initially thought to be on top of its head for snorkel-like use, but it's now believed to be fully terrestrial with nostrils near the tip of its snout. Its brain was small, around 300 cubic centimeters, with a low encephalization quotient, and it had a sacral enlargement likely used for glycogen storage rather than as a second brain. If endothermic, Giraffatitan would have needed substantial food daily, while a poikilothermic metabolism would have required less. As a warm-blooded animal, the daily energy demands would have been enormous. It would probably have needed to eat more than 182 kilograms of food per day. If it was fully cold-blooded or was a passive bulk endotherm, it would have needed far less food to meet its daily energy needs. Internal organs of these giant sauropods were probably enormous. Brachiosaurus has been called one of the most iconic dinosaurs, but most popular depictions are based on the African Giraffatitan. Giraffatitan's nasal crest is more pronounced and located further back on the skull, while Brachiosaurus has a less prominent nasal crest. This difference might suggest variations in nasal cavity structure and possibly different respiratory or vocalization adaptations. The large nasal arch has been postulated as an adaptation for cooling the brain, as a surface for evaporative cooling of the blood. With their heads held high above the heart, Brachiosaurids would have had stressed cardiovascular systems. It is estimated that the heart of Brachiosaurus would have to pump double the blood pressure of a giraffe to reach the brain, and possibly weighed 400 kilograms. The distance between head and heart would have been reduced by the S-curvature of the neck by more than 2 meters in comparison to a totally vertical posture. The neck may also have been lowered during locomotion by 20 degrees. They would have moved their necks in lateral directions more often than in dorsal-ventral directions while feeding. Unlike other sauropods, Brachiosaurus was unsuited for rearing on its hind limbs. It has been used as an example of a dinosaur that was most likely ectothermic because of its large size and the corresponding need for sufficient forage, but more recent research suggests it was warm-blooded. Lithostrotia, from the late Jurassic Lourinhã Formation of Portugal, was initially referred to Brachiosaurus but is now recognized as a distinct taxon. A new phylogenetic analysis explored the evolutionary relationships of basal titanosauriforms, with varying treatments of quantitative data affecting tree topologies. The study supports the distinctiveness of Lithostrotia, Brachiosaurus and Giraffatitan, and highlights the importance of data weighting in phylogenetic analyses. Additionally, the research indicates a diverse and widespread presence of titanosauriforms before the Cretaceous, with an increase in diversity through the late Jurassic and a significant faunal turnover at the Albian to Cenomanian boundary. In 2001, Sanders, Manley and Carpenter published a study on 115 gastroliths found with a Cedarasaurus specimen. These stones were identified as gastroliths due to their spatial distribution, partial matrix support, and edge-on orientation, suggesting deposition while the carcass had soft tissue. The gastroliths weighed a total of 7 kilograms, with most being less than 10 milliliters in volume and ranging from 0.1 grams to 715 grams in mass. They were predominantly spherical, though larger ones were more irregular and primarily composed of chert, with some containing fossils. The irregularity and size suggest intentional ingestion rather than accidental. The gastrolith's dull coloration indicates color was not a selection factor. Their high surface area to volume ratio implies they helped grind or crush ingested plant material. Fragile sandstone clasts among the gastroliths may have become delicate due to environmental chemical processes post-deposition. The vertebrae of Sauroposeidon are the longest known among sauropods, with one vertebra measuring 1.4 meters in length. This extreme elongation indicates an exceptionally long neck, estimated to be around 12 meters. Sauroposeidon's vertebrae are honeycombed with tiny air cells, similar to the bones of modern birds. This adaptation made its neck lighter and easier to support and move, a significant advantage for such a large animal. It could potentially raise its head to a height of 18 meters, comparable to a 6-story building. This incredible height would have allowed it to feed on vegetation far beyond the reach of most other herbivores of its time. Its mass is estimated to be between 40 and 60 tons, making it one of the largest known dinosaurs, though slightly lighter than the massive Giraffatitan due to its more gracile build. The discovery of Sauroposeidon provides valuable insights into the evolutionary adaptations of sauropods, particularly in terms of neck elongation, lightweight skeletal structures, and gigantism. It helps paleontologists understand the diversity and specialization within the group. The Europatitan specimen is one of the most complete titanosauriform sauropods from the early Cretaceous of Europe. It is defined by 9 unique anatomical features, including details of the cervical vertebrae, dorsal vertebra lamina structures and distinctive characteristics of the scapula and dorsal ribs. It was a giant dinosaur with large bones, such as dorsal ribs 210 centimeters long, a scapula 165 centimeters long and a dorsal vertebra 70 centimeters tall, although incomplete. Its cervical vertebrae were extremely pneumatized and had a central length of 115 centimeters, indicating a very long neck similar to Sauroposeidon. Paleontologists suggest these giraffe dinosaurs could hold their necks almost vertically, potentially placing Europatidan's head about 16 meters above the ground, making it one of the tallest known dinosaurs in Europe. Euhelopus was a relatively long-necked sauropod, with a 4-meter neck composed of 17 cervical vertebrae. The presacral vertebrae had a camellate pneumatic structure, made of many small pneumatic chambers, as is characteristic of titanosauriforms and some mamenchosaurids. Pneumatic chambers even extended into the ilium, as occurs in many titanosaurs. The humerus was apparently nearly as long as the femur, although there is some uncertainty in this ratio, as it is not certain that the humerus and femur from which this ratio was calculated belong to the same individual, and the femur in question is incomplete. Euhelopus was a long-necked sauropod similar to Mamenchosaurus, but its affinities are controversial. Most studies favor a close relationship between Euhelopus and titanosaurs, rather than mamenchosaurids. Ugueto was a relatively large sauropod, with an estimated length of 15 meters and a weight of 5 tons. Its neck was estimated to be twice as long as its body, which may be a record for neck-to-body ratio. The exact ratio is unknown, because no dorsal vertebrae have been reported, although some hind limb material suggests the approximate size of the body. The long neck is the result of the individual vertebrae being greatly elongated. It is unknown if the number of cervical vertebrae was increased. Ugueto is also diagnosed by bifurcate anterior cervical and neural spines, another unusual trait for a titanosauriform. The phylogenetic analysis of sauropods performed by its describers indicates that Ugueto is a basal Somphospondylian, and is most closely related to Titanosauria, being a close relative of Euhelopus. Tambatatanes was discovered in the late Cretaceous Tamba Formation of Japan, dating back approximately 90 million years. This makes it a relatively late surviving member of the sauropod group, providing insights into sauropod evolution during this period. It possesses a combination of primitive and derived traits, making it an important taxon for understanding the evolutionary transition within sauropods during the late Cretaceous. Tambatatanes adds to the knowledge of sauropod distribution in Asia. Its presence in Japan provides evidence of the faunal exchanges and geographical distribution of sauropods in what is now East Asia. It was likely an herbivore that played a significant role in its ecosystem. Its diet and feeding strategies can provide insights into the plant life and ecological interactions in Japan. It was probably around 14 meters long and its mass was estimated at some 4 tons. It was a basal titanosauriform and possibly belonged to the Euhelopodidae. Hypsilosaurus was initially thought to be a large crocodilian, estimated at 15 meters in length, but modern estimates as a titanosaur suggest it was around 12 meters long, with a weight of 13 tons. Fossilized eggs attributed to Hypsilosaurus, discovered in France since 1846, were among the first dinosaur eggs identified, though they were not recognized as such for decades. These eggs are unusually large, about 30 centimeters in length, and studies of their age have yielded varying results. Some eggs with thin shells have been linked to Hypsilosaurus, with hypotheses suggesting shell thinning could be due to environmental changes or pathology, although other studies indicate successful hatching. Researchers now consider that thinner eggs might come from different taxa or result from variations in the age of the egg layers or natural differences within the species. Dinosaurus lived in the Maastrichtian age of the late Cretaceous, approximately 68 million years ago, and was originally named as another species of Antarctosaurus. However, it has since been separated out, since Titanosaur cladistics is a mess. It would probably have been 18 meters long and 6 meters tall. The specific name of Dinosaurus septentrionalis means northern in Latin, a reference to the fact that the species was discovered on the northern hemisphere, whereas Antarctosaurus means saurian from the southern hemisphere because its type species Antarctosaurus wichmannianus was found in Argentina. The generic name honors the Indian paleontologist Sohan Lal Jain, who worked on the cranial nerve impressions in the skull, and in 1982 published a study about the results. Ironically, Jain himself considered the remains synonymous with Titanosaurus in the 1997 description of Isosaurus. Like all titanosaurs, Savannasaurus was likely a wide-gauge sauropod, meaning that it would have stood and walked with its feet far apart from the midline. In 2020, Poropat and colleagues pointed to the width of its sternal plates and sacrum as evidence for a wide-gauge stance. The robust humerus of Savannasaurus was also considered a likely adaptation to a wide-gauge stance, which would have been convergently acquired with Saltasaurians. They also suggested that the unusual form of the astragalus was also an adaptation to weight-bearing, but the absence of other hindlimb bones made this unclear. Yet, Poropat and colleagues also noted traits that would have increased the flexibility of the vertebral column, namely the absence of hyposphene hypantrum articulations and the presence of prominent excavations below the transpressigopophal laminae. Brachiosaurus is a controversial genus of sauropod dinosaur found in the Kalamydu Formation of India. The fragmentary remains were originally described as a theropod, but it was later determined to be a titanosaurian sauropod. Length estimates by researchers exceed those of the Titanosaur argentinosaurus, as longer than 35 meters and weighing over 80 tons. A 2023 estimate placed Brachiosaurus as potentially weighing approximately 110 to 170 tons, with paleontologist Michael Benton giving it a length of 45 meters. If the upper estimates of the 2023 records are accurate, it may have rivaled the blue whale as one of the largest animals to ever exist. However, all of the estimates are based on the dimensions of the fossils described in Yadgiri and Ayasami, and in 2017, it was reported that the holotype fossils had disintegrated and no longer exist. Ryangosaurus is distinguished by its unique vertebral characteristics. Its dorsal vertebrae show distinctive features that set it apart from other titanosaurs, such as specific shapes and structures that provide insights into the diversity of sauropod anatomy. The vertebrae also exhibit extensive pneumaticity, meaning they have numerous air-filled spaces. This adaptation is believed to have reduced the weight of the skeleton, a common feature in large sauropods that helped support their massive bodies. The presence of Rhengasaurus in China provides valuable information about the distribution of titanosaurs in Asia. It was probably about 35 meters long, as evidenced by its 2 meters long femur and 127 centimeters long right tibia. In 2020, Molina Perez and Laramendi gave a lower estimation of 24 meters and 34 tons. The holotype vertebrae of Titanosaurus indicus were first discovered in 1828 by William Henry Sleeman of the East India Company Army during an expedition near Jabalpur, in India. Sleeman, initially searching for petrified wood, found the vertebrae on Barasimla Hill and gave 2 pieces to Surgeon Spilsbury, who also collected a specimen. Spilsbury sent these fossils to James Prinsep in Calcutta in 1832, who recognized them as fossilized bones and returned them to Sleeman. In 1862, Thomas Oldham, the first director of the Geological Survey of India, moved the fossils to Calcutta, where Hugh Falconer identified them as reptilian bones. Richard Lydecker described them as a new species, Titanosaurus indicus, in 1877. By the late 20th century, the original specimens were thought to be lost, prompting Matthew Carano to create a cast in 2010. However, Indian paleontologist Dhananjay Mohebe later discovered one of the original vertebrae in 2012, which had been misplaced among old fossils. This discovery was part of a project to locate lost specimens from the Lamita Formation. The holotype Aracker represents a small individual with a body length estimated at around 6 meters long. The size of a fully grown Aracker is unknown. Some distinctive features have been identified by Ruler Rogers. The hollowing out between the front joint process and the vertebral body is high and wide. The hollowing out between the parapophysis and the lamina between the front joint process and the vertebral body extends over the entire front of the pedestal of the neural arch but not above the spinal canal. The posterior joint processes are narrower than the neural spine. The ridges between the neural spine and the posterior joint processes are reduced and shorter than the facet of the posterior joint process. Diamantinosaurus was a small titanosaur from the late Cretaceous period, measuring 15 to 16 meters in length and weighing 15 to 20 tons. This dinosaur is part of the Lithostrotia group, which typically had bony osteoderms in their skin, though no osteoderms have been found for Diamantinosaurus. Fossil evidence includes a near-complete forelimb, ribs, pelvic girdle, and upper hind limb, but no cranial material is available to study its skull or teeth. Unique features of Diamantinosaurus include the retention of certain hand bones and a manual ungual claw, along with flat distal humeral and femoral condyles. It lived in the Winton Formation of central Queensland, Australia, an area characterized by a mosaic of rivers, lakes, and swamps, with a subtropical to temperate climate. Although Diamantinosaurus was herbivorous, its specific diet cannot be determined due to the absence of skull and dentition fossils. Saltasaurus was characterized by a short neck and stubby limbs. It was the first genus of sauropod known to possess armor of bony plates embedded in its skin. Such small bony plates, called osteoderms, have since been found on other titanosaurians. These were keeled or spiked and perhaps were ordered in longitudinal rows along the back. Like all sauropods, it was herbivorous. Because of its barrel-like rump, shaped like a hippopotamus, Powell suggested that Saltasaurus was aquatic. Despite its small stature, Saltasaurus was still graviportal like other sauropods, meaning it could not run because its hind limbs had to be held straight at the load-bearing phase of their walking cycle. Powell assumed adult individuals were protected against predators by their body armor, while juveniles were protected by the herd as a whole. The discovery of Yamanosaurus marks the first dinosaur fossils ever found in Ecuador. This small herbivorous dinosaur reached about 6 meters in length and was likely adapted to the low vegetation of its time. The incomplete, disarticulated skeleton revealed that Yamanosaurus had a protective armor, and its long neck allowed it to reach up to 3 meters in height. The species, named after the Yamana region where the fossils were found and Loya where the discovery was announced, belonged to the titanosaur group, known for their large size. The fossils date back to the late Cretaceous, just before the extinction event caused by a meteorite. The discovery is significant given the challenging conditions in Ecuador, where erosion typically hinders fossil preservation. Malawisaurus was a medium-sized titanosaur, reaching about 4.7 tons and 16 meters in length. It had a distinctive, short, squarish head with large nasal holes to keep its skull cool in a hot climate. Despite its size, it was a medium-level browser, stripping leaves from branches with its thick, peg-like teeth. Fossil evidence suggests there may have been two distinct morphs of Malawisaurus, based on variations in neck vertebrae. The brain case studies indicate a large semicircular canal and a side-positioned eye nerve, suggesting slow head and neck movements while browsing. It likely lived in herds within a riverbed environment, sharing its habitat with various other species, including crustaceans, frogs and another titanosaur. Paleodiditon was a relatively small sauropod, measuring 6 meters in length and weighing 1 metric ton. Unique features in its fossil remains, such as specific characteristics of its vertebrae, distinguish it from other titanosaurs. Its rear back vertebrae have parallel ridges on the underside lateral process, unlike others that typically touch. The neural spines on the tail base vertebrae have a distinctive corner projecting forward. The ischium has a triangular process forming a buttress overlapping the ilium. Initially, the paleontologists believed that the mix of Procellus and Amphiplatus vertebrae was unique to Paleodiditon, but new discoveries have shown this feature is not exclusive to the species. It lived on the Cretaceous Hayteg Island with a diverse assemblage of animals. The top predator of the island ecosystem was the giant Asdarchid pterosaur Hatzegopteryx. Alamosaurus is the only known sauropod to have lived in North America after the sauropod hiatus, a nearly 30 million year interval for which no definite sauropod fossils are known from the continent. The earliest fossils of Alamosaurus date to the Maastrichtian age, around 70 million years ago, and it rapidly became the dominant large herbivore of southern Laramidia. The origins of Alamosaurus are highly controversial, with 3 hypotheses that have been proposed. The first of these, which has been termed the Austral immigrant scenario, proposes that it is descended from South American titanosaurs. It is closely related to South American titanosaurs. It was a gigantic quadrupedal herbivore with the long neck, the long tail, the relatively long limbs and the body partly covered with bony armor. It would have measured around 26 meters long, 5 meters tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 30 to 35 tons. Though no skull has ever been found, rod-shaped teeth have been found with Alamosaurus skeletons and probably belonged to this dinosaur. The vertebrae from the middle part of its tail had elongated centra. It had vertebral lateral fossae that resembled shallow depressions. Like most sauropods, Ankylosaurus would have had a long neck and tail, but it also carried armor in the form of osteoderms. In 2005, over 500 bones have been assigned to Ankylosaurus and additional material has been found since, including a partially articulated skeleton with skull, which makes it one of the best-known dinosaurs in France. However, recent studies suggest that the type locality is not a monospecific titanosaur bone bed and that part of the bones attributed to Ankylosaurus probably belong to a second titanosaurian taxon. It lived on what was the Ibero-Armorican island, a landmass including much of present-day France and Iberian Peninsula. Histological studies show characteristics related to an island environment such as a slowed growth rate. However, with a size of about 14 meters in length for the largest known individual, Ankylosaurus was not an insular dwarf unlike some other Ibero-Armorican titanosaurs like the genus Macronaria from the Hayteg Island. Rapidosaurus was a fairly typical sauropod, with a short and slender tail, a very long neck and a huge, elephant-like body. Its head resembles the head of a diplodocid, with a long, narrow snout and nostrils on the top of its skull. It was a herbivore and its small, pencil-like teeth were good for ripping the leaves off trees but not for chewing. A rare specimen of a juvenile was uncovered in a museum collection by Christina Curry Rogers and colleagues. The specimen was estimated to weigh about 40 kilograms and was likely between 39 and 77 days old by the time of its death. Based on bone remodeling, the juvenile sauropod was also believed to have been capable of surviving with little to no parental care. During the Maastrichtian, like it is now, Madagascar was an island, having separated from the Indian subcontinent less than 20 million years earlier. It was drifting northwards but still around 12 degrees more southerly in latitude than it is today. The prevailing climate of the time was semi-arid, with pronounced seasonality in temperature and rainfall. Nemegtosaurus is one of those rare titanosaurs where we actually had a skull. Granted, that's all we have of it. It was very similar to that of a diplodocid, due to convergent evolution, and it was a fairly advanced titanosaur, though titanosaur classification surrounding Nemegtosaurus is something of a train wreck. It was found in the Nemegt Basin in the Gobi Desert. It had slender, pencil-like teeth with a chisel tip, but it's unknown what sorts of plants it would have fed on in its river delta environment. It would have been cathemeral, active throughout the day and night at short intervals, and it lived alongside a very diverse community of dinosaurs. The diet of Nemegtosaurus is unknown, however. There are no plant fossils from the Gobi, but during the late Cretaceous, flowering plants became increasingly diverse, although in many environments ferns and conifers were still more common. Neither is it clear whether Nemegtosaurus browsed high in the trees or grazed on low-growing plants. Related titanosaurs include both long-necked browsing forms like Rapidosaurus and short-necked forms like Bonitosaura. Maxicolosaurus is considered a medium-sized titanosaur. The type specimen belonged to an animal about 12 meters long, with an estimated weight of 5 tons. It had a long neck and tail, ridged teeth, unusual among sauropods, and lived about 80 million years ago. Because sauropods seem to have lacked significant competition in South America, they evolved there with greater diversity and more unusual traits than elsewhere in the world. Like many other titanosaurs, Maxicolosaurus had osteoderms. In 2006, a team led by Alexander Kellner described the remains as a new genus and species of sauropod, Maxicolosaurus topi. The genus name honors the Maxicali, an ethnic group indigenous to the region, and the species name refers to the Maxicali deity Topa. Magurosaurus, a sauropod from the Hayteg Basin, underwent insular dwarfism due to limited food supplies and lack of predators, leading to its smaller size. This phenomenon, first suggested by Knüppe, was later confirmed by a 2010 study showing that small Magurosaurus individuals were adults. Histological studies in 2010 revealed that even the smallest individuals were fully grown, and the species had a reduced growth rate but a high metabolic rate. Magurosaurus also had dermal armor, evidenced by an osteoderm found near Sinpetru village. Lithostrotian eggs from the late Cretaceous of Romania, likely belonging to Magurosaurus or Paleodiditon, were discovered in the Haiteg Basin. These eggs, some containing embryos, show signs of dermal armoring. The Haiteg Basin served as a nesting ground for various dinosaurs, including titanosaurs. Initially thought to be in nests, the eggs were later found to lack preserved nesting structures. During the early Maastrichtian, the region was subhumid with seasonal precipitation, later transforming into an extensive wetland. All titanosaurs exhibited a wide-gauge posture, where their feet were positioned apart from the body's midline. More derived titanosaurs had an even wider stance compared to their ancestors. Dreadnoughtus had a wide-gauge posture but not as extreme as Saltasaurids, indicated by its perpendicular femoral condyles and the femur head not turning inward. These features support that Dreadnoughtus was not a Saltasaurid. Additionally, its broad sternal bones suggest a wide pectoral girdle, giving it a broad-shouldered, broad-chested appearance. It gained media attention for being described as the largest known dinosaur, though this claim is debated. The species is known from two partial skeletons, making it surprisingly complete for a titanosaur, with 45% skeletal completeness. Like all titanosaurs, Dreadnoughtus had a wide-gauge posture, with limbs held widely apart. Its forelimbs were longer than those of any other known titanosaur, but not significantly longer than its hind limbs. Initial weight estimates suggested 58 long tons, but subsequent evaluations in 2015 revised this to between 21 and 37 long tons, with ongoing debate. The dinosaur was about 26 meters long, and the original specimen was not fully grown at the time of death. The specimens were well preserved due to rapid burial in a fluvial environment. The fossil remains of Futalogosaurus are among the most complete for titanosaurs. The neck was particularly robust, with thick vertebrae and strong muscles, suggesting it had great strength and flexibility in this area. It also had a wide-gauge posture. Its legs were positioned further apart from the body's midline, providing stability for its massive size. The tail vertebrae of Futalogosaurus had unusual extensions and ridges, possibly for muscle attachment, which may have played a role in balance and locomotion. As a herbivore, it likely fed on a variety of plant materials, including conifers, cycads and ferns, contributing to the understanding of late Cretaceous flora. Argentinosaurus is among the largest known land animals, though its exact size is difficult to estimate due to incomplete remains. Paleontologists compare its fossils with more complete smaller sauropods and scale them up to estimate Argentinosaurus dimensions. Its massive size was likely due to factors such as efficient feeding with a long neck, fast growth, and numerous small offspring. Benefits of its size included prolonged digestion for maximum energy extraction and increased predator protection. Argentinosaurus, like other sauropods, laid eggs, with hatchlings weighing around 5 kilograms. The species may have been preyed upon by Mapiosaurus, a large theropod that possibly hunted in packs. In 2013, a computer model study of Argentinosaurus skeleton and muscles estimated its speed and gait. The model, based on a skeletal reconstruction and muscle comparisons with living animals, weighed 83 tons using simulations. The digital Argentinosaurus learned to walk with an optimal gait similar to a pace, reaching speeds of over 7 km per hour. The study suggested that Argentinosaurus had reached a functional size limit, and larger terrestrial vertebrates might need different body shapes and behaviors to prevent joint collapse. The authors noted that the model could be improved with more data from living animals and more complete sauropod specimens. Australopithecus was a large sauropod, the largest dinosaur discovered in Brazil, with the only known specimen, an adult, having a length of about 25 meters. Several traits show that it was a titanosaur. The hyposphere hypantrum articulations are missing from the vertebrae, the cervical and dorsal vertebrae do not have forked neural spines, and the internal texture of the bone is camellate. The describers determined that Ostropesiodon was a new genus based on a number of autapomorphies in the vertebrae. The 13th cervical vertebra has columnar centropostigapophyseal laminae, and its rear centrodiapophyseal lamina splits into two prongs. The first dorsal vertebra has front and back centrodiapophyseal laminae that curve downwards and outwards, and its diapophysis stretches down to the top margin of the centrum, and the frontmost part of the spinopresagopophal laminae forks in the dorsal vertebrae position towards the back of the torso. Additionally, Ostropesiodon possesses a unique combination of other vertebral traits, not seen elsewhere among titanosaurs. Unlike many other titanosaurs, Isosaurus had a relatively short and stocky neck, which may have influenced its feeding habits and the types of vegetation it could access. It also had notably robust limb bones, suggesting it was well adapted to bearing its massive body weight. This sturdiness is characteristic of titanosaurs but particularly pronounced in Isosaurus. Fossil evidence includes parts of the skull, which is rare for titanosaurs. This has provided valuable insights into the head structure and possible sensory capabilities of Isosaurus. Estimates suggest it was about 18 meters long and weighed approximately 14 tons. While not the largest titanosaur, it was still a substantial and impressive dinosaur. It has unique vertebral structures, including well-developed neural spines and robust centra, which differentiate it from other titanosaurs and contribute to its distinct classification. Fungus and coprolites believed to have been voided by Isosaurus indicate that it ate leaves from several species of tree, since these fungi are known to be pathogens which infect tree leaves. Joshua Smith, who informally led the research team that found Paralitidan fossils, told an interviewer, "It was a truly enormous dinosaur by any reckoning. Little of Paralitidan is known, so its exact size is difficult to estimate. However, the limited material, especially the long humeri, suggested that it is one of the most massive dinosaurs ever discovered, with an estimated weight of 59 tons. The complete right humerus measured 1.70 meters long, which at the time of discovery was the longest known in a Cretaceous sauropod. The autochthonous, scavenged skeleton was preserved in tidal flat deposits containing in the form of fossil leaves and root systems, a mangrove vegetation of seed ferns, Weichselia reticulata. The mangrove ecosystem it inhabited was situated along the southern shore of the Tethys Sea. Paralitidan is the first dinosaur demonstrated to have inhabited a mangrove habitat. Titanosaurs achieved their enormous size, often exceeding 30 meters in length and 50 tons in weight, through unique anatomical and physiological adaptations. Their long necks and efficient feeding mechanisms allowed access to vast amounts of plant material without extensive movement. Robust, column-like limbs and a wide-gauge posture provided essential support and stability. Their respiratory system, likely featuring air sacs, enabled efficient oxygen exchange and lightened their skeletal structure. Rapid growth rates and high reproductive rates, with numerous small eggs, ensured population stability despite predation. The large size of titanosaurs offered increased protection from predators and efficient food storage for prolonged energy extraction. These combined adaptations facilitated their survival and dominance during the late Cretaceous, highlighting their remarkable evolutionary success.